The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport buzzed overhead as Jake Martinez pushed his maintenance cart down Terminal B, the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into his shoulders after another 12-hour shift. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He'd been mopping the same stretch of polished floor for 3 years now, invisible to the thousands of travelers who rushed past him daily with their rolling suitcases and urgent destinations. But tonight was different. Tonight, a small voice would cut through the airport's constant hum of announcements and conversations, changing everything he thought he knew about the world above his pay grade. "Excuse me, sir. I can't find my mommy." Jake looked down to see a little girl, maybe 6 years old, standing beside a designer luggage set that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her clothes were pristine, her blonde hair perfectly braided, and her blue eyes were wide with the kind of controlled panic that suggested she'd been taught never to make a scene in public. What struck him most wasn't her obvious wealth or her composure, but the way she looked at him. Not through him, like most people did, but directly at him as if he mattered. Emma Westbrook was supposed to be halfway to Los Angeles by now, sitting in first class with her laptop open, reviewing quarterly projections for her tech company's board meeting. Instead, she stood frozen in the middle of the busy terminal, her phone pressed to her ear as airport security explained that her daughter Lily had somehow slipped away from the gate area during a brief moment when Emma had been distracted by an urgent business call. The words "missing child" echoed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. 20 minutes earlier, everything had been under control. Lily had been sitting quietly beside her, coloring in her travel activity book while Emma handled what her assistant had described as a minor crisis with their biggest client. One phone call, one moment of divided attention, and now her entire world had tilted sideways. The airport's vast expanse suddenly felt infinite, filled with countless places where a small child could disappear, and Emma's carefully controlled executive demeanor began to crack under the weight of pure maternal terror. Jake knew that feeling all too well. 6 months ago, he'd experienced his own version of that same panic when his 8-year-old son Tommy had wandered off during a grocery store trip, lost in thought about something only Tommy's unique mind could understand. The 15 minutes of searching had felt like hours, and the relief when he'd found Tommy calmly reading nutrition labels in the organic food section had nearly brought him to his knees. Now looking at this lost little girl with her expensive clothes and frightened eyes, Jake felt that same protective instinct surge through him. Jake set down his mop and crouched to Lily's eye level, his work uniform rumpled and his hands still damp from cleaning, but his voice gentle and reassuring. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Jake, and I work here at the airport. Can you tell me your name?" Lily studied his face for a moment, her young mind apparently running through the stranger danger protocols she'd been taught, before deciding that something about this man felt safe. "I'm Lily Westbrook," she said, with the precise pronunciation of a child who'd been raised to speak clearly. "My mommy and I were supposed to get on an airplane, but she was talking on her phone about very important business things, and I saw a service dog, and I wanted to see if the doggy was okay because he looked sad, and when I turned around, my mommy wasn't there anymore." The words tumbled out in a rush, her composure finally beginning to crack as the reality of her situation settled in. Jake's heart clenched as he recognized the familiar story of a parent caught between work demands and family needs, a balance he struggled with every single day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. He thought about Tommy, probably at home right now, working on his homework with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who watched him after school in exchange for Jake handling her small apartment maintenance issues. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he cleaned up after wealthy travelers, his own son was learning to be self-sufficient in ways that most kids his age never had to consider. "Well, Lily, the good news is that airports are really good at helping people find each other," Jake said, pulling out his radio to contact security while keeping his voice calm and steady. "And the even better news is that my son Tommy is about your age, so I know exactly how scary this feels. But we're gonna get you back to your mommy real soon." He couldn't help but notice the quality of her clothing, the expensive little backpack with its designer label, the kinds of things that represented a world completely foreign to his own experience. As they walked toward the security office, Jake found himself thinking about the conversations he'd had with Tommy, about different kinds of families, different kinds of struggles. His son had an unusual way of seeing the world, picking up on details and patterns that other people missed, understanding things about human nature that seemed far beyond his years. Tommy had once told him that rich people and poor people were scared of exactly the same things, they just had different ways of hiding it. Looking at Lily now, walking beside him with her small hand trustingly placed in his larger, work-roughened one, Jake thought his son might be onto something. The airport's security office buzzed with controlled urgency, as reports of the missing child had already begun circulating through their communication systems. Jake had delivered Lily safely to the authorities, but something kept him from simply returning to his maintenance duties. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not as hired help, but as a person who mattered. Maybe it was his own memories of panic and helplessness when Tommy had gone missing. Or maybe it was something deeper, a recognition that this moment was somehow significant in ways he couldn't yet understand. Emma Westbrook burst through the security office doors like a woman possessed, her usually perfect appearance disheveled from running through the terminal in her designer heels. Her silk blouse had come untucked from her pencil skirt, and her carefully styled hair had escaped its professional chignon. But none of that mattered now. The only thing that existed in her world was the small figure sitting in an oversized office chair, swinging her legs and chatting animatedly with the security guard about airplane safety procedures. "Lily!" Emma's voice cracked as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace that spoke of every parent's worst nightmare finally ending. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her dizzy, and for a moment, she forgot about everything else. The missed flight, the rescheduled meetings, the client crisis that had started this whole ordeal. Nothing existed except the solid warmth of her child in her arms. Jake watched this reunion from the corner of the office where he'd been giving his statement to security, and something twisted in his chest. The raw emotion on Emma's face reminded him of his own desperate search for Tommy 6 months ago, but it also highlighted the vast differences in their worlds. When Tommy had gone missing, Jake had been alone in his panic, with no security team, no airport staff mobilizing to help, just one terrified father searching grocery store aisles while other shoppers walked past without a second glance. "Thank you," Emma said, finally looking up from Lily to address the security team. Her voice was thick with emotion, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you all so much. I don't know how to express what this means to me." Her gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Jake before moving back to the lead security officer. She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she scrolled through her contacts. "Please, let me know who I should speak to about expressing my gratitude properly. My assistant can arrange something." The security officer gestured toward Jake, who was quietly preparing to leave now that his part in the situation was resolved. "Actually, ma'am, you should thank Jake Martinez here. He's the one who found your daughter and brought her to us. Jake works in our maintenance department." There was something in the officer's tone, a subtle emphasis that Jake had learned to recognize over the years. It was the way people spoke, when they wanted to make sure credit was given where it was due, but also wanted to clarify the social hierarchy involved. Emma turned her full attention to Jake for the first time, and he felt the weight of her assessment. She took in his uniform shirt with the airport logo, his work boots, the slight calluses on his hands from years of manual labor. Her expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, calculation, and something that might have been awkwardness. This was clearly not the kind of person she was accustomed to thanking personally. "Oh," she said, and Jake caught the hesitation in her voice. "Well, thank you, Mr. Martinez. I really appreciate you helping Lily." She reached into her purse, a designer bag that probably cost more than Jake's car payment, and pulled out her wallet. "Please, let me give you something for your trouble." The gesture felt automatic, practiced, as if monetary compensation was her default response to any service rendered. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice steady and polite. "That's not necessary, ma'am. I was just doing what anyone would do. I'm glad Lily is safe." He couldn't quite hide the stiffness in his tone, though. The offer of money felt like a dismissal, a way of putting him back in his proper place as hired help, rather than acknowledging him as a person who had genuinely cared about her daughter's well-being. Lily, who had been listening to this exchange with the sharp attention that children often brought to adult interactions, suddenly spoke up. "Mommy, Jake told me about his son Tommy, and he said Tommy likes to read about airplanes just like me. And he knew exactly what to do when I was scared. And he didn't make me feel bad about getting lost. Her words carried the simple honesty that adults often found uncomfortable, especially when it highlighted their own social awkwardness. Emma looked between her daughter and Jake, clearly trying to navigate this unexpected social situation. In her world of board meetings and corporate hierarchies, interactions were governed by clear protocols and understood boundaries. But this was different. This man had cared for her daughter not because he was paid to, but because he was a father himself who understood fear and vulnerability. "You have a son?" Emma asked, her tone softening slightly as she recognized common ground. "How old is he?" For the first time since entering the security office, she seemed to see Jake as a person, rather than simply an employee who had performed a service. "Tommy's 8, Jake replied, his voice warming as it always did when he talked about his son. "He's pretty special. Really smart kid, notices things other people miss. He's probably at home right now working on some project that's way too advanced for his grade level." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Emma found herself genuinely curious about this man who clearly adored his child. "What grade is he in?" Emma found herself asking, surprised by her own interest. She rarely engaged in personal conversations with service workers, not out of deliberate rudeness, but because her world simply didn't create opportunities for such interactions. Her life was carefully compartmentalized, with clear boundaries between personal and professional, between her social circle and everyone else. "3rd grade, but he reads at about a 6th grade level," Jake said, unable to suppress a small smile. "His teacher says he has an unusual way of looking at problems, finds solutions that other kids don't think of. Sometimes I think he understands people better than I do, even though he's just a kid." There was something vulnerable in the way Jake spoke about Tommy, a mixture of pride and worry that Emma recognized from her own parenting experiences. Emma felt an unexpected pang of connection. "Lily is in 1st grade, but she's already reading chapter books. Sometimes I worry that she's growing up too fast, that she sees too much of the adult world through my work." The admission surprised her. She rarely shared personal concerns with strangers, but something about Jake's obvious devotion to his son had touched a nerve. The conversation was interrupted by Lily tugging on Jake's uniform shirt. "Mr. Jake, can I ask you something?" When he nodded, she continued with the directness that only children possessed. "Are you poor? Because Mommy's really rich, and she gets scared when people don't have enough money, so maybe she could help you and Tommy somehow." The silence that followed Lily's question was deafening. Emma's face flushed crimson with embarrassment, while Jake felt his own cheeks burn with a mixture of humiliation and defensive anger. The security officers suddenly found their paperwork extremely interesting, and the air in the small office became thick with uncomfortable tension. "Lily, that's not appropriate to ask," Emma said quickly, her voice sharp with mortification. She had taught her daughter to be generous and kind, but she had clearly failed to teach her about social boundaries and the delicate nature of economic differences. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Martinez. She doesn't understand." Jake took a deep breath, fighting down the instinct to defend his dignity and his life choices. He looked at Lily, whose question had been asked with genuine concern rather than malice, and his anger softened. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Lily, your mom is right that it's not polite to ask people about money. But to answer your question, Tommy and I have everything we need. We take care of each other, and that's what matters most." Emma watched Jake's response with growing respect. Many people would have been offended or angry, but he had handled her daughter's innocent but inappropriate question with grace and dignity. She realized that in the space of 20 minutes, this man had shown more genuine care for Lily than many of the highly paid professionals in Emma's life showed for anything beyond their paychecks. "We should probably get going," Emma said finally, the awkwardness of the situation making her eager to return to the familiar territory of her scheduled, controlled life. "Thank you again, Mr. Martinez. Really." She gathered Lily's belongings and prepared to leave, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Jake had spoken about his son, or the patience he had shown with Lily's questions, or simply the recognition that this man represented a kind of authentic goodness that was rare in her experience. As they prepared to leave the security office, Lily broke free from her mother's grasp and ran back to Jake. "Mr. Jake, I hope I get to meet Tommy someday. Maybe we could be friends." She hugged his legs quickly before returning to Emma's side, leaving Jake standing there with an expression of surprise and something that might have been longing. Emma felt an uncomfortable stirring in her chest as she watched this interaction. Her daughter, who was often shy around strangers, had connected with this man in a way that seemed natural and unforced. It made Emma wonder what she might be missing in her own carefully controlled relationships. What authentic connections she might be avoiding in her pursuit of professional success and social security. The walk back through the terminal felt different now. Emma found herself noticing the airport employees, who had been invisible to her before, wondering about their lives, their families, their stories. She held Lily's hand tighter than usual, acutely aware of how close she had come to losing the most important thing in her world while she was distracted by business calls and professional obligations that suddenly seemed far less critical than they had an hour ago. 3 days after the airport incident, Jake was scrubbing stubborn stains from the food court floor when his supervisor, Mark, approached with an expression Jake had learned to dread. Mark held his phone in one hand and wore the kind of fake smile that usually preceded bad news delivered with corporate politeness. "Jake, buddy, we need to talk," Mark said, gesturing toward the maintenance office. "Got a call from upstairs about you. Seems like you've become something of a celebrity." The tone was light, but Jake caught the underlying tension. In his experience, attention from management was rarely a good thing for someone in his position. Jake followed Mark into the cramped office, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he violated some protocol by getting involved with the lost child situation? Was there paperwork he should have filled out? He thought about Tommy, who would be getting home from school soon, expecting his father to pick him up for their weekly grocery shopping trip. Mark pulled up a video on his phone and turned the screen toward Jake. "You seen this yet?" The video showed Jake kneeling beside Lily in the terminal, his face clearly visible as he spoke gently to the frightened child. The caption read, "Airport hero saves CEO's daughter. Heartwarming moment goes viral." The view count was already approaching 2 million. Jake's stomach dropped as he realized what this meant. Someone had filmed the entire interaction without his knowledge or consent, turning what should have been a private moment of human decency into public entertainment. He thought about Tommy, about their quiet life, about the careful boundaries he maintained to protect his son from unwanted attention or scrutiny. "The good news is it makes the airport look great," Mark continued, scrolling through comments that ranged from heartfelt praise to uncomfortable speculation about Jake's personal life. "Corporate is thrilled about the positive publicity. The bad news is that reporters are already calling, wanting to do follow-up stories. HR wants to know if you're interested in any interview opportunities." Jake shook his head immediately. "I don't want any interviews. I just want to do my job and go home to my son." The idea of strangers knowing his name, his face, his story, made him feel exposed in a way that went against every protective instinct he'd developed as a single father. But Mark wasn't finished. "There's more. Apparently this Emma Westbrook woman has been calling the airport all morning. Turns out she's some big-shot tech CEO and she wants to meet with you personally. Something about expressing her gratitude properly." Mark's tone suggested he thought Jake would be excited about this development, but Jake felt only a growing sense of unease. The video had been shared across multiple social media platforms, picking up momentum with each repost. Comments flooded in from people who claimed to be inspired by Jake's kindness, but others speculated about his motivations, his background, even his fitness as a father. Someone had already identified him by name and posted information about where he worked, making Jake feel like his privacy had been stripped away without his permission. Emma Westbrook sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Westbrook Technologies building, staring at her laptop screen where the airport video played for the 20th time that morning. She had been trying to focus on quarterly projections and merger discussions, but her mind kept returning to the image of Jake Martinez kneeling beside her daughter with such natural gentleness. Her assistant Rebecca knocked and entered with a fresh cup of coffee and an apologetic expression. The airport called back. "Mr. Martinez declined the interview requests and doesn't want to meet with you. His supervisor says he just wants to be left alone." Rebecca paused, clearly uncomfortable with delivering news that her boss didn't want to hear. Emma felt a sharp stab of something that might have been disappointment or rejection. She wasn't accustomed to people declining her requests for meetings, especially when those meetings were intended to express gratitude and potentially offer compensation or opportunities. In her world, everyone wanted access to her network, her resources, her influence. Did they say why? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. She had spent the past 3 days thinking about that interaction in the security office, particularly about Jake's quiet dignity when she had offered him money. Something about his response had lingered in her mind, challenging assumptions she hadn't even realized she held. Rebecca consulted her notes. His supervisor mentioned that he's a very private person, focused on his son. Apparently, he's not comfortable with the media attention. She hesitated before adding, "There's something else. The video has generated some negative comments too. People questioning his motives, making assumptions about single fathers. It might be affecting his family." Emma's chest tightened as she realized that her desire to publicly acknowledge Jake's kindness might have inadvertently caused problems for him and his son. She thought about Lily's innocent question about whether Jake was poor, and how gracefully he had handled her daughter's lack of social filters. Now that same interaction was being dissected by strangers on the internet. Meanwhile, Jake arrived at Tommy's school to find his son sitting alone on the playground bench, his backpack clutched tightly against his chest. Other children were playing nearby, but Tommy seemed withdrawn in a way that immediately set off Jake's parental alarm bells. His son's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, approached with a concerned expression. "Mr. Martinez, could we have a quick word?" Mrs. Patterson asked, glancing meaningfully toward Tommy. There was an incident today during lunch. Some of the older children had seen the video online and were asking Tommy questions about it. Not mean-spirited exactly, but overwhelming for him. Jake felt his protective instincts flare as he realized that his son was already being affected by the unwanted attention. Tommy was sensitive, thoughtful, often overwhelmed by too much social stimulation. The idea that strangers on the internet were discussing their family made Jake's hands clench into fists. Tommy looked up as his father approached, his 8-year-old face showing a maturity that always broke Jake's heart a little. "Dad, why are people talking about us online?" Mrs. Rodriguez showed me the video because her grandson sent it to her. She said, "People think you're a hero, but you look sad in the comments." Jake knelt down to Tommy's eye level, the same position he had taken with Lily 3 days earlier, but this time the conversation was infinitely more difficult. "Some people filmed me helping a little girl who was lost, and they put it on the internet without asking. Sometimes when things go viral like that, it brings attention we don't want." Tommy considered this with the serious concentration he brought to all problems. Like when we helped Mrs. Rodriguez with her groceries and she wanted to tell everyone in the building how nice we were, but we said we just like to help people and don't need everyone to know about it. His analogy was so perfectly apt that Jake felt both proud of his son's understanding and sad that Tommy had to deal with these adult complications. "Exactly like that," Jake confirmed. "The difference is that Mrs. Rodriguez is our friend and neighbor. These are strangers who don't know us but think they have the right to judge us or make assumptions about our life." That evening, Jake's phone rang repeatedly with calls from unknown numbers. Reporters, apparently, wanting to interview the airport hero about his background, his story, his philosophy on helping others. Jake let every call go to voicemail, but the persistent ringing made both him and Tommy nervous. They had always been a team of two, comfortable in their small world, and this invasion felt threatening in ways that went beyond mere inconvenience. The breaking point came when Jake discovered that someone had posted photos of their apartment building online, along with speculation about his income and lifestyle. Comments ranged from sympathetic offers of help to judgmental observations about single fathers and working-class families. The violation of privacy felt like a physical assault, and Jake realized that his simple act of helping a lost child had somehow opened his family up to scrutiny from strangers who felt entitled to opinions about their lives. Emma, meanwhile, found herself increasingly troubled by the turn the story had taken. What had started as a heartwarming moment had devolved into invasive speculation and unwanted attention for a man who had simply done the right thing. She began to understand why Jake had declined her meeting request, why he wanted to be left alone. Sitting in her penthouse apartment that evening, looking out over the city lights while Lily played quietly with her expensive toys, Emma felt a growing sense of responsibility for the situation. Her world of privilege and public attention had somehow contaminated Jake's private life, turning his kindness into a spectacle. The irony wasn't lost on her that, while she could afford to control her own privacy through lawyers and public relations teams, Jake had no such protection. The realization that her gratitude might have caused more harm than good left Emma feeling helpless in a way that was foreign to her usual experience of being able to solve problems through resources and influence. For the first time, she began to understand that there were consequences to the intersection of different social worlds, consequences that fell disproportionately on those with less power to control their own narratives. The viral video had revealed something uncomfortable about society's relationship with genuine kindness, turning a private moment of human decency into public entertainment and judgment. Both Emma and Jake were learning that good intentions could have unintended consequences, and that sometimes the cost of being seen could be higher than anyone anticipated. Emma stood outside Lincoln Elementary School at 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, feeling more nervous than she had before any board meeting or investor presentation. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, having deliberately left her usual business attire and jewelry at home. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone for the third time, second-guessing the decision that had brought her to this unfamiliar neighborhood. For 2 weeks, she had been haunted by the knowledge that her attempts to express gratitude had backfired spectacularly. The viral video had died down, but not before causing real disruption to Jake and Tommy's quiet life. Emma's corporate legal team had managed to get the worst invasive content removed from social media platforms. But the damage to their privacy had already been done. She watched as children streamed out of the school building, their backpacks bouncing as they ran toward waiting parents and school buses. Emma felt out of place in this world of modest cars and working parents, but she was determined to see this through. Her research had told her that Tommy Martinez was in Mrs. Patterson's third-grade class, and that he usually walked home with a group of neighborhood children. When she finally spotted Tommy, Emma's breath caught in her throat. The boy was smaller than she had expected, with dark hair that stuck up in the back and glasses that were slightly too large for his face. He walked alone, a few steps behind the other children, carrying what appeared to be a library book along with his regular backpack. There was something in his posture that reminded Emma painfully of Lily during her shyest moments. Emma approached carefully, not wanting to startle him or create any appearance of impropriety. "Excuse me, Tommy?" she called softly when he was close enough to hear. "I'm Emma Westbrook. I think your dad helped my daughter Lily at the airport a couple of weeks ago." Tommy stopped walking and turned to study her with the kind of direct, assessing gaze that seemed far too mature for an 8-year-old. His eyes, Emma noticed, were remarkably similar to his father's, intelligent, cautious, but not unkind. "You're the rich lady," he said matter-of-factly. "Lily asked my dad if we were poor." The bluntness of the statement made Emma wince, but she appreciated Tommy's directness. "Yes, I'm Lily's mom. And I wanted to apologize to you and your father because I think my trying to thank him might have caused problems for your family." Tommy considered this for a moment, his head tilted slightly to one side. "The internet people were mean," he said simply. "They said things about my dad that weren't true." Mrs. Rodriguez cried when she read some of the comments because she said people don't understand what a good father he is. Emma felt her chest tighten with guilt and something deeper, a recognition of the real human cost of the viral attention she had inadvertently triggered. "I'm so sorry about that, Tommy. I never wanted anything bad to happen to you or your dad. He was so kind to Lily, and I just wanted to thank him properly." "Dad says rich people sometimes try to help, but don't understand how their help can hurt," Tommy replied with the devastating honesty that children possessed. "He's not mad at you, but he's scared that people will judge me because of what they think about him." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Rodriguez, Tommy's after-school caregiver. Emma explained who she was and why she was there, watching as Mrs. Rodriguez's expression shifted from suspicion to understanding to a kind of protective sympathy. "That poor man," Mrs. Rodriguez said, shaking her head. "He works so hard, takes such good care of this boy, never asks for anything from anyone. And then these people on the computer say such terrible things about single fathers, about working people. It's not right." Emma spent the next 20 minutes listening as Mrs. Rodriguez and Tommy painted a picture of Jake's life that was far richer and more complex than anything the viral video had captured. She learned about the way Jake helped elderly neighbors with repairs and grocery shopping, how he had organized a reading program for the children in their apartment building, how he worked double shifts when necessary but never missed Tommy's school events. "He reads to me every night," Tommy added proudly, "even when he's really tired from work. And he helps me with my science projects, even though he says he's not smart about science. But he is smart about people and about being kind." Emma felt something fundamental shifting inside her chest as she realized how completely she had misunderstood the situation. She had seen Jake's life through the lens of her own privilege, assuming that financial struggle automatically meant deficit, rather than recognizing the wealth of love, community, and values that characterized their existence. When Jake arrived to pick up Tommy, his face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, wariness, and then a kind of resigned politeness. Emma stood up from the school bench where she had been sitting with Tommy and Mrs. Rodriguez, suddenly aware of how this unplanned encounter might appear to him. "Mr. Martinez," she began carefully, "I hope you don't mind that I waited to see you. I wanted to apologize in person for what happened with the video and all the attention. I know it caused problems for you and Tommy." Jake's expression remained guarded, but Emma could see him processing her presence, her casual clothing, the fact that she was sitting on a public bench rather than summoning him to some corporate office. "You didn't post the video," he said finally, "and you didn't write those comments, but I appreciate the apology." "I also wanted to thank you again," Emma continued, "but not in the way I tried before. Tommy was just telling me about some of the things you do for your neighbors and your community. Lily hasn't stopped talking about how safe you made her feel when she was scared." Tommy looked between the two adults with the perceptive awareness that children often brought to adult conversations. "Dad, she feels bad about the mean comments. And she listened when I told her about how you help people all the time, not just when there are cameras around." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks at Tommy's innocent but pointed observation. The boy had identified something essential about her initial response to his father's kindness. She had been focused on the public acknowledgement, the visible gratitude, rather than understanding the private values that had motivated Jake's actions. "Tommy's right," Emma said quietly. "I was thinking about thanking you in my world, with my rules, instead of understanding that you don't need or want that kind of recognition. I'm sorry for that too." Jake studied her face for a long moment, and Emma found herself holding her breath. She realized that his opinion of her had somehow become important in a way that went beyond mere politeness or social obligation. There was something about his quiet integrity that made her want to be seen as worthy of respect. "Lily's a good kid," Jake said finally. "Smart, curious, kind to people. That doesn't happen by accident. Whatever else is going on in your life, you're doing something right as her mother." The unexpected compliment hit Emma harder than any business achievement or professional recognition ever had. Coming from this man who clearly understood both the challenges and the rewards of single parenting, the words carried a weight that board resolutions and profit reports never could. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been listening to this exchange with the satisfied expression of someone watching a good story unfold, patted Emma's arm gently. "You know what, Mia? Why don't you come have coffee with us sometime? Not for any business reason, just because Tommy could use more friends, and maybe Lily could too." Emma looked at this elderly woman who lived in a world completely different from her own, but who offered friendship with such natural warmth, and felt something long frozen beginning to thaw in her chest. "I would like that very much," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As they prepared to part ways, Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we invite them to my science fair presentation next month? I'm doing a project about kindness and how it spreads, and I want to interview people who help other people." Jake looked at Emma with a question in his eyes, and she nodded quickly. "We would be honored to come," she said, and meant it completely. For the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to an event that had nothing to do with business or obligation, everything to do with genuine human connection. 6 months later, Emma sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of Jake and Tommy's small living room, helping Lily and Tommy build an elaborate tower out of mismatched blocks, while Jake finished preparing dinner in the adjacent kitchen. The apartment was nothing like her penthouse. The furniture was second-hand, the walls needed paint, and the space could fit inside her walk-in closet. But it radiated a warmth that her expensive home had never possessed. "Ms. Emma, can you hand me that blue block?" Lily asked, completely absorbed in the architectural challenge before her. She had insisted on being called Ms. Emma rather than Mrs. Westbrook, explaining that it sounded friendlier and less scary. Emma had been surprised by how much she enjoyed this casual form of address, so different from the formal titles that usually preceded her name. Tommy carefully positioned each block with the methodical precision that characterized all his projects. "I think we need a stronger foundation," he observed, studying their creation with serious concentration. "Dad always says that things last longer when they're built on something solid." Emma watched Tommy work and marveled at the wisdom that seemed to flow naturally from this 8-year-old who had experienced more responsibility and independence than many adults. Over the past months, she had learned to see intelligence in forms that had nothing to do with test scores or academic achievements. Tommy's understanding of human nature, his ability to find creative solutions to everyday problems, his intuitive grasp of fairness and kindness, these were gifts that no expensive education could purchase. The science fair presentation had been a turning point for all of them. Tommy's project on the ripple effects of kindness had featured interviews with Jake, Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma, and several other community members about moments when small acts of compassion had created larger positive changes. Watching Tommy present his findings with such earnest passion had moved Emma to tears, not just because of his obvious intelligence, but because of his fundamental goodness. Jake appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Dinner's ready," he announced. "Tommy, can you help Lily wash her hands?" Emma had grown to love these simple domestic moments that punctuated their time together. There was something profoundly satisfying about the routine of family meals. The casual conversation around a kitchen table, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself. As they gathered around the small table, Emma reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She still ran her company, still attended board meetings, and made strategic decisions. But those responsibilities no longer consumed her entire identity. She had learned to leave work at the office, to prioritize relationships over revenue, to find joy in moments that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. "Dad, tell Ms. Emma about the reading program," Tommy suggested between bites of Jake's homemade spaghetti. She could probably help make it even better. Jake had started a literacy initiative in their apartment complex, teaching basic reading skills to adult immigrants who struggled with English. What had begun as helping one neighbor had grown into a weekly gathering that brought together people from different backgrounds and ages. Emma had been amazed by Jake's natural teaching ability, his patience with struggling learners, his gift for making people feel capable and valued. "It's not really my program," Jake said modestly. "Mrs. Rodriguez does most of the organizing, and everyone contributes something. I just help with the actual reading part." Emma smiled at his characteristic humility. Over the months, she had learned that Jake consistently deflected credit while quietly solving problems and supporting others. He had helped her neighbor install a new smoke detector, tutored a teenager struggling with math, organized a community garden in the small patch of land behind their building. His generosity flowed naturally from his character, rather than from any desire for recognition or reward. "Actually," Emma said, setting down her fork, "I've been thinking about something. My company has been looking for ways to support community education initiatives, not as charity, but as genuine partnership. We could provide resources, tablets for digital literacy, maybe a small grant for books and materials, but only if the community wanted that kind of support." She had learned to approach offers of help very differently now, understanding that good intentions could become harmful interference if they weren't grounded in genuine respect for existing relationships and structures. Jake's initial wariness of her wealth had taught her valuable lessons about the difference between helping and controlling, between supporting and overwhelming. Lily looked up from her plate with bright eyes. "Tommy, if your dad teaches more people to read, maybe I could help too. I'm really good at reading now." "That would be perfect," Tommy replied seriously. "Kids are sometimes better teachers than adults because they remember what it feels like to not know something yet." After dinner, while the children worked on homework at the kitchen table, Emma and Jake sat on the small couch, sharing comfortable silence. These quiet moments had become precious to Emma, times when she could simply exist without performance or agenda, when conversation flowed naturally rather than being driven by professional objectives. "I never thanked you properly," Emma said quietly, watching Lily help Tommy with a math problem. "Not for finding Lily, but for showing me what I was missing. I was so focused on succeeding in my world that I forgot there were other ways to live, other things that mattered." Jake turned to look at her, his expression soft in the lamplight. "You gave me something too," he said. "Before we met, I was so focused on protecting Tommy from the world that I think I was keeping him from experiencing it too. Watching you learn to trust us, seeing Lily and Tommy become friends, it reminded me that opening up to people can be worth the risk." Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes as she realized how completely her definition of success had transformed. 6 months ago, her greatest fear had been losing control of her company or her carefully constructed life. Now, sitting in this modest apartment surrounded by the warmth of genuine relationships, she understood that her previous existence had been a kind of poverty she hadn't even recognized. As evenings settled around them and the children's voices created a gentle soundtrack of friendship and learning, Emma marveled at the unexpected family they had created together. Not traditional, not conventional, but real in ways that transcended conventional definitions. They were 4 people who had found each other across differences of class and circumstance, discovering that authentic connection was possible when built on mutual respect, genuine care, and the simple recognition that everyone deserved to be valued for who they truly were. The apartment's walls might need paint, and the furniture might be worn, but this space contained more genuine wealth than Emma's penthouse ever had. Here, surrounded by love that asked for nothing but offered everything, she had finally found her way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.